If you asked me about a time when being honest felt easier than I had expected, I'd tell you about the moment not too long ago where I finally said, I just won't be attending. That was it. Just a few simple words, no explanation, no backstory. It was just pure honesty. For years, my version of no always came padded with context. Like, I'd love to, but, or maybe next time, or I have this and that going on. It was anything to make sure the other person felt okay. But this time was different. I had absolutely gotten clear that I didn't want to be in that environment anymore, that group was no longer something that I wanted to be a part of, and the only answer that made sense was the most straightforward and simple one. And the second I said it, the weight lifted. Not necessarily because it was easy, but because I knew it was true. And that's the thing about honesty. It doesn't necessarily erase the discomfort that may come with it, but it certainly clears the fog and it shifts something. It makes space for trust, both with yourself and with others. My guest is Rachel Lucas. Rachel is a coach who helps navigate conflict and transform into trust-building opportunities. With a background in HR and a deeply empathetic approach, she partners with people to uncover what's real. She believes trust is the North Star, and that it starts with trusting yourself before you can extend it to others. In this episode, we're talking about what happens when you stop avoiding the hard stuff. We'll explore how honesty opens doors, what the cost of keeping the peace really is, and how even small reckonings can reshape how we show up for ourselves and with others. I'm Marney Andes, and this is the She Lives Intentionally podcast. Rachel, tell me about a time when being honest felt easier than you expected.
Being honest has never been the problem for me. It's always been the opposite. Um, I seem to have been born with the personality or the communication style where being assertive or being direct or being honest felt normal and easy and like, why doesn't everyone do that? And so it's actually hard to think about a time when it was easier than I expected because I haven't had that challenge. And I can think about so many times that the results of that were a lot harder than I expected, or not the outcome that I expected, or even the outcome was fine, but maybe the feedback that I got from others around me was that I had come across as more harsh or intense or abrasive than I meant to be.
So I'm glad that you pointed that out. And isn't it funny how when I wrote that question to ask you how much I probably projected my own discomfort at the very beginning of this, because I was raised to be honest. I've always had the honest reaction to things, but I learned where honesty became hard because of the reaction of others.
I feel like a lot of what I've learned as not only I've gotten that feedback, like you said, we get input from the people around us, from our culture, from sort of the results of how we say things or what we say. And it does start to factor in and it does start to shape, is this really how I want to show up? And maybe sometimes we cloak things that we wouldn't have otherwise and maybe don't feel as authentic. But I think one of the things that I've learned is also that my experience is not the only experience. And just because it's been easy for me and I've had maybe different challenges or consequences from that, it doesn't mean that other people find it easy. And I've especially doing the work I do with workplace conflict, I've learned a lot about people's having different communication styles and different conflict styles, and that there might be someone else who would be intensely uncomfortable with being honest about how they're feeling or something that's bothering them or causing them an issue. Maybe there's another kind of person that might need to think about something or kind of analyze and spend some time with it before they feel kind of prepared or even like they know themselves what their truth is and how they want to present that. And so I guess I just want to add that I've really grown in respect for the fact that we do have different sort of natural tendencies and communication patterns, and none of them are good or bad. They come with different pros and cons. And I found it kind of interesting that a lot of the work that I do ends up helping people who are very uncomfortable being honest or direct or communicating in a way that lets people know that they're uncomfortable or that something's wrong. Um, I spend a lot of my time helping those people learn how to communicate in a way, or um, just um, get more comfortable communicating in ways that does get their needs met without them having to say, do it in a way that I might feel more comfortable doing it.
I've been in conversations with teams, with individuals, where just the concept of conflict, being in conflict, all those have been asks before of, hey, we need to help people with this. And you've already shared some of that, but I want to ask, how do you help people when you work with them see conflict as something useful to pay attention to instead of something to avoid?
I start by being fairly patient with the fact that as long as they're currently in it, as long as they're experiencing the conflict and the stress reactions and sort of that fight, flight, freeze thing that can happen, um, I don't try to do a lot of logic or say be direct because it doesn't really, it's not something that they can hear at that point. So I do tend to use a lot of the skills that I learned in coaching school, a lot of the skills that I learned sort of on the other side of the HR desk in my career. And I found that some of the most valuable ones are a very intensely active form of listening, where I'm not expecting them to hear what I'm saying or to be in a place where they can care about what I'm saying or see the value in conflict, and more hearing how they're feeling. There's a book that I love by Chris Voss. He used to be the top negotiator for the FBI, called Never Split the Difference. And he calls it tactical empathy. And essentially, it's kind of reflecting back what people are saying so that they feel heard. And I find that until they feel truly heard, they're not able to kind of let go of some of that stress until we can kind of resolve some of the conflict and allow them to feel safe again. They're not really interested in any of the values or benefits. After they're in a better place and they're feeling more empowered and comfortable and sort of out of the storm, they're usually really a lot more open to some of the value. Certainly, I like to highlight some of the pieces around opportunity. It's not uncommon that I uncover things during the process of mediating a workplace conflict, or even in coaching executives, that is creating more friction or more challenges in the organization. And so I always kind of create a separate parking lot and am able, specifically with the mediation pieces, to kind of give that to leadership and say, um, we're only addressing in the actual mediation the things that the parties have control over, that really sets them up to be successful in this new agreement. And there's these other things, like maybe the way the role is structured or the reporting structure, or the way that there's overlap in their job descriptions, that's making it sort of systemically more likely that they're going to have this problem again. And if there's anything that y'all can do from a systemic perspective, these are opportunities that we've uncovered that not only probably had something to do with causing this issue, but could be causing others. And um, there's often a sense of relief and almost joy of like, oh, it wasn't just me.
Just as you were sharing that piece around the systemic issue, it actually was already getting me in a mode of thinking about where we were at the very top of the podcast, which was having honesty feel easier. And I think about my own dynamic. I was raised in a family where it was never said, but it was certainly modeled that harmony was better. That as long as everybody was just okay, it was better than any kind of conflict. In fact, conflict was seen as something incredibly negative, disruptive. Conflict wasn't seen as information that we could actually do something with it. And then I think about the fact that where I've had experiences in my career, especially early on to the middle part, where I look back and think, no wonder I didn't feel necessarily empowered to say something or do something because it just it brought up such negative experiences for me that if you were to say something and then it caused disruption, then who knows what that might do to the entire environment. And so, would you think about maybe a moment in your own life when you had to stop avoiding conflict and finally face something that was really happening and what that did for you?
Definitely. I mean, first of all, I think it makes a lot of sense, even if we weren't raised in a home that prized harmony above all else, which I think many of us probably were. But even if that weren't the case, when we're kind of looking through this lens of conflict exists between me and this other person, or me and this issue or this organization, it really creates kind of a physical response for us. And that's normal. It's a normal reaction, but our bodies do tend to get into that fight, flight, freeze place where they start pumping with cortisol and adrenaline, and it doesn't feel great. It does feel kind of stressful and uncomfortable. So I think it makes sense that there's not a lot of comfort with it, especially since we have this kind of zero sum idea of we're good at conflict or we're not, instead of kind of seeing it as a skill or a set of skills. But definitely on the personal side. So one of the ideas that can be kind of helpful when you're trying to get a team to work together is, if we can, if there's some pieces that we can just kind of tolerate and deal with, then we can kind of figure out how to get to the goal, and that's great. We can get what we need done and kind of ignore some of the parts that are bothering us. And tolerating can also really backfire. So that's what my story is about today, in response to this question, where it just backfired so badly for so long. So I had a situation with my washing machine a few years ago where all of a sudden I started getting a sort of symptom when I would run a load of laundry. I would hit the rinse cycle and I would hear this gurgling sound that did not seem normal. And the problem was it was not coming from the washing machine. It was coming from a completely different room. And I went in and looked, and in my master bathroom, got two sinks. I was getting some sort of dirty, gross, sewery water up chucking into the sink. And um, I did not know how that was possible, how it could happen, and was so grossed out. I was worried about flooding. It didn't overfill the sink. It's just it would come up and then go back down, but so uncomfortable. I called the plumber, and we live in a condo, so it's kind of one of those, if it's not happening inside your walls, we can't help you kind of a thing. You've got to work with the HOA. My husband had been the president of our HOA quite recently, and so I was like, oh, like, at least he knows that, sort of like who to talk to, and we can figure this out. Because the plumber was like, we can't, everything's clear inside your walls, and we don't actually know why this is happening. And meanwhile, you still have to run laundry, and my clothes were coming out clean. It's just that my sink was getting disgusting, and it's a very unsettling sound to suddenly hear gurgling, gross sewer water. Um, and so I talked to my husband about it, and he was super busy at work, super stressed. There'd been some turnover in the HOA side, and he wasn't quite sure who to talk to. And somehow weeks turned into months, turned into a year and a half of somehow I've just been tolerating every time I run a load of laundry, at least once a day, I'm getting some kind of sewage backup in my bathroom sinks. And there's something about tolerating where you kind of forget you're tolerating things. Like you forget that it's causing this constant friction and you just start to accept it in this, it's very like insidious way. And yes, I was upset about it, but I didn't want to nag. And, I did nag to a degree, and he was confused and he wasn't sure who to talk to. And he tried a couple of things and it didn't work. And just, I looked up a year and a half later and it was still happening every day. And I finally hit this wall where I was just like, it cannot happen anymore. I don't care what it takes. I don't care if I have to stop my whole life to make this stop. I can't believe I've been putting up with it for so long. There's no way it can be healthy. It's awful how often I'm having to clean my sink. And nothing had worked. No form of talking about it, being gentle, being intense, nothing had moved the needle. And so I finally told him that I was going on strike and I would not be laundering his underwear going forward until it was fixed. And what do you know? But wasn't it fixed within 3 days?
Interestingly enough, we're laughing about it, but even as you were talking, I was thinking, what are the things that I have just let go on, to your point, that I've just tolerated? I would love to hear your experience with this and the people that you've worked with, which is, how does facing the hard truth instead of avoiding it build stronger trust between people?
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely talking to a kind of a core truth around awareness, sort of understanding how someone else is feeling, or even how you yourself are feeling, is really, I think we say as coaches a lot of time, it's half the battle. It's 50% of the work. And a lot of the time, because we are kind of tolerating things or avoiding it, like you said, it's not comfortable to think about this piece or this person and the conflict that we're feeling with them. We don't actually know even sometimes how we feel. And that's something that when I first started doing a lot of mediation and workplace conflict work, that kind of surprised me at first. And it doesn't surprise me anymore. But when I would ask people, okay, what's your ideal outcome for this relationship? What would be your ideal working relationship with this person going forward? A lot of the time, they hadn't even thought about that. It didn't seem like a possibility. And so there was a lot of movement that happened, even just in getting clear themselves on, I don't need to be friends with them. I do need to be able to do this, or I do need to be able to communicate about this part of work with them. And it almost like you can see a lightness happen, but also, a lot of the time, they hadn't spent any time thinking about if there were some specific things that they would want to be different. What would those be? If you could ask the person to maybe stop doing this thing or start doing this thing, and it would make it easier to work with them, what would that specifically look like? And so, a lot of the pre work that I do with clients before we go into a mediation room is some of that around, like, let's get kind of clear on, say that they are willing to make some changes. What would make the biggest difference? So I think that piece has just surprised me that there hasn't been a lot of clarity or awareness around what the specifics would need to be, and that's kind of gotten in people's way of being able to take some action and ask for some changes, or even make them. um, but I think your other point around, like, or question around how does facing the hard truth uh, versus avoiding it build more trust? Um, I find that the trust is not necessarily built in the moment that the truth is faced, but in the aftermath. So while the meeting with me, where when we actually mediate and kind of come up with some new requests for each other or a new agreement for how we'll work together, does do a lot of that important awareness work, the trust happens afterwards. Um, yes, it's really cool when I see the surprise on people's faces. There's both surprise and often relief as well, of like, oh my gosh, she's asking for the exact same things that I want. And like, that's all she wants. Like, we want the same thing. It's kind of cool to see that kind of relief, and almost like, I was expecting this to be worse. I was expecting this to be more complicated or this to be harder. But it's in that, say, few months after that conversation, and I know my process usually recommends a few months of follow-up meetings, kind of checking in with another leader who can kind of help guide them around how's it going, and are they doing what they said they were going to do, and if not, what's going on? Did any changes need to be made? But when you see the other person, when you've made a request of somebody to do something differently, and you see them in good faith making the effort to do that thing, that's when the trust starts getting built. It's not what you say, it's what you do. And when you can see that behavior, especially over time, being demonstrated that they are doing their best to do the thing that you've asked, that's when it starts to feel more safe and comfortable, and like that trust is actually being rebuilt or built for the first time.
I think that is such a great way of framing it, whether it be in a work setting or even in a personal setting. One of the things I wanted to bring up as part of the conversation with you today is around some research that shows that women who speak directly risk being judged more harshly, potentially, but also that when women witness other women doing it, they're more likely to follow. And this definitely rings true for me. As I get older, I'm finding I'm around more women that are willing to voice and risk that. Maybe they don't even see it as being risky, so to speak. But I wonder, in your work, I know you work with both women and men, but how do you see that ripple effect play out in your work? Meaning people that see other people be willing to say the things, to speak directly, that it encourages more people to follow.
Kind of hearing almost two parts to the question, because on one hand, I don't actually end up doing a lot of at least conflict or mediation work with clients who are more comfortable being direct. And I think it's because they don't build up resentment and sort of, they don't ever get to a blow up point where they've been quiet for a long time and then they've just had enough. While they might come across as a little bit more abrasive or intense in person, they it's almost like they have a release valve, and so because they're kind of saying what they think as they're going along or how they feel, it's not building up this head of steam that suddenly erupts or that is so sort of shut down that they don't know how to get out of it. So um maybe a little bit harder to speak to how that than when they do it for, in front of others, that influences people. I've found that there is definitely a con to not being as comfortable being direct, or at least being able to speak up for what you need and what would make you more comfortable, is truly like you can build up this amount of resentment, and you've taken it, you've tolerated it for so long that then when you do finally blow up, you do have a lot less control and choice, and it's much more likely to make a mess or cause significant fallout in your life in one way or another. And so I know certainly working with, say, coaching clients and those kinds of clients to get more comfortable with. Is there a middle way? Is there a way between not saying anything and saying everything you're thinking in a very aggressive way? And how can that middle ground way that you could be comfortable with protect you from ever getting to that place where you have lost control and you do feel like other people are now making choices for you? When it comes to the other part around like what have I seen when it comes to women being willing to speak up, and how that can empower other women, I think I've seen it the most in the sexual harassment realm. It's an incredibly intimidating thing to speak up about, and unfortunately the outcomes and sort of the price that people pay for being willing to stand up and say this is not okay, is often fairly high, and feels kind of lose lose a lot of the time. And so it's always been interesting to me to speak to women who either have experienced that or are experiencing it, who have very specific reasons why they're not speaking up. who, have done it once in the past, or maybe more than once, and the backlash or the judgment has been so intense that they just learned, like, this is something that I don't speak up about. And yet it's been really inspiring to see that when somebody is willing to say, if this is not okay, and it's not just even me that I'm speaking up for, but it's also everyone else that this might happen to if I don't, or that might be experiencing this right now, and um, have had a different experience where they've learned that it's not worth it to speak up. And if those when those women do are willing to speak up regardless of consequences, it's been cool to see other women see that they have more options, to see that maybe they're worthy of saying this is not okay and I don't have to take this. And there's never any guarantees as to outcome, but I feel like that's when I've seen it, maybe at its most powerful.
I analyze things. I have to process things in order to to even react to them. And I've had plenty of examples throughout my life, whether I've been in a just sort of a casual conversation or a work conversation where something struck me, either not right, didn't sit quite right. And it wasn't until, a few hours later that suddenly I was like, and that is what I wish I would have said. Do you ever have anyone come up with like, I know what to say, or I would know how to resolve that, or I know how I would react to that, but I just needed more time to be able to do that?
Definitely. Um, I think all of us have had that experience, and that some of us have that experience a lot more frequently. I think there's a sitcom, it might be a Friends episode also, where they kind of joke about how one person always says what they feel in the moment and then regrets it. Oh, it might be You've Got Mail. They also talk about this. She always cannot think of the things she wants to say in the moment and then later can think of it and is so frustrated that she wasn't able to say it. And he has the opposite problem where he always says exactly what he thinks and then later is often regretting that he said too much or he said it too intensely or too quickly. But so I do think that that it is very normal for people to have different ways that they process things and different ways that um, sort of time periods in which they're more comfortable responding, and that those have some pros and cons. Even in that book I referenced by Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference, he talks about there being three styles of conflict that you might be uh, experiencing with any other person. Like whatever your style is important, but what their style is also important, and that there is an assertive type that maybe is very fast to have an opinion about something and just kind of says whatever they think. Again, maybe there's some consequences or they regret some of that later. There's a style that is very analytical, like what you're talking about, where they genuinely need a little bit of time to process and then they know. And then there's that style where is it more accommodating and the relationship part is really important to them. And so kind of communicating with people through the lens of how do we in the box of our relationship find the solution that we're looking for is might have maybe how they approach it. And so I don't think that there's anything wrong with any of us. It's really normal, whatever it is for us, and helpful to know what that is. And I think to your point, there's a lot to be said for once you do know what it is that you want to say. There often is the ability, maybe not always, but often you have the ability to schedule a conversation or follow up. And I know that's one of the things that I learned when I first started working in HR. Just because something needs to be said doesn't mean that a board meeting is the place to say that, or a crowded hallway. Maybe a one-on-one conversation later would feel respectful and they would be in a place where they could hear it, because I'm being more intentional about the setting. And I think often people respond pretty well to, I've been thinking about this thing, and is it okay if we connect about it?
If there was somebody listening who knows that they're holding something back, whether that be a truth or a conversation they should have or some sort of conflict they'd like to see resolved or at least addressed, what's one step that they can take today to move toward that?
This feels a little woo-woo, but I think I would ask them to feel the weight of it first. Sometimes we don't notice how, like, quite literally heavy it can feel on our shoulders when we're carrying it. And maybe a good way of starting that would be to ask, like, what is it costing me? Because we can get kind of comfortable and kind of stop feeling what it's costing us, and not realize that our washer's been backing up for a year and a half. And so getting a little bit more clear on how is it limiting you or holding you back or adding extra effort to your life. Um, I find that being as clear as possible about the ways that it's kind of getting in our way can sometimes give us more energy to figure out what we actually want to do about it, and also in that process more clarity around what do we want to do about it. It doesn't mean that it gets solved overnight, but kind of knowing how is it affecting us, and how heavy is the weight that we're carrying, uh, really does help to kind of crystallize things. I know, for instance, that um, one of the things that I can predict almost every time is, like, by the time that a mediation client comes to me, it's usually been 2 years that they've been sort of dealing with this, and it's been getting progressively worse. And it's finally gotten so bad that they can't deal anymore. They can no longer be in the same room with that person or talk to them. And so it's time to bring in something external. And I find, like, they're always surprised to realize that it's been that long. So there's that awareness of, yeah, how long has it been, and what does that make me want to do?
That's fantastic advice. The weight of it, how much has it affected you? I mean, thank you for sharing that. I want to move into the closing questions. So I'll start with the first one, which is, what does living intentionally look like in this season of your life?
I have been getting more honest with myself about physics. So I feel like another way to say this would be, I've gotten more comfortable saying no to more things, but I've found that to be a harder way to come at it. It feels more negative to be like, I need to say no to more things. Whereas when I ask myself, what is physics going to allow here? It really gives me much more awareness of, yeah, I could probably take all three of those meetings in different parts of town tomorrow. I could technically do it, but is physics going to allow me to do that in a way that I feel good? Is it going to maybe, am I not accounting for things like traffic or my own energy? And there's just something about it that, like, brings me back to being more realistic and allowing myself to be more gentle with myself, and th- set my goals in a way that are not fighting physics, and instead am more setting myself up for success.
What's one shift, big or small, that helps you live true to yourself?
So this one is a technique that I learned in my trauma informed coaching class. And it was a very hands on class. We learned a lot of different techniques that we could use with our clients and with ourselves. But it takes about 2 minutes. And I've found that it helps me so much, both throughout the, like, maybe in the morning or even throughout the day as I'm dealing with clients, and even just in a public place and kind of picking up some of the energy of the crowd. But the shift is that I really am able to ground in my body and repeat my name and do sort of big arms and feel the energy bubble around myself, and notice not only sort of my own body and getting grounded, claim that space as mine, but when I notice who else is in there with me, um, it's so interesting. The names will sort of pop up, excuse me, pop up, and I'll realize, oh wow, like, I've been thinking about this person, I've been working with this person, and they're kind of in here with me. And in that sort of process, I'm um, encouraging them to go back to their own space and creating that empty space around where there's nothing but me. And I found that I then engage with the world differently. I'm able to show up fully present for my clients differently. I'm able to ensure that I'm not bringing other energy into, say, a mediation. Um, and even when I help mediation clients sort of get grounded using that method, I've seen much different results. So tiny little tweak of sort of this little mini energy practice and kind of clearing my bubble of other people's energy so that it's just me has made a massive difference. And I can tell when I've done it and when I haven't.
What's one thing you've learned about life that you'd want every woman to know?
I think that they should know that they can trust themselves. One of the things that I see in my work is this idea that I might not be good enough, I might not be worthy, um, I might not deserve my role or my space or what I have. And what I've learned over and over, and I think I will continue to learn this, is I might not be perfect. I will never be perfect. I'm very human. I'm going to keep making mistakes, but I can trust myself to handle it, to make the decisions that I need to make as they arise, to know when something's off, and to take care of myself. And I think we get so much noise, especially now that we've got the internet and social media. It's sort of more than ever before about, all this clickbait, 5 signs that you're not doing this right, or all these sort of pieces that what you might not know about this thing can hurt you. And it creates this noise that I think makes it even harder for us to see that we are worthy, that we don't have to earn it, that we can trust ourselves to take good care of ourselves and to make the decisions that are the best for us.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Marnie.
If something here stirred something in you, don't let it sit. You can learn more at shelivesintentionally.com.